As songwriters, it can be super easy to keep reverting back to the most basic versions of our chords, which results in really boring chord progressions like the most basic 1, 5, 6, 4 chord progression, for example, where you probably rolled your eyes in the middle of that chord progression. I internally did. I don't know if I did externally, but I certainly internally did. So if you're looking to spice up your minor 6 chord in the context of a major key, this is the video for you. So if you're confused by what on earth is a 6 chord, what is a minor 6 chord? I've never heard of that before. I don't know what you're talking about. Basically, it's very simple. If you just take any key, specifically we're talking major key in this, your 1 chord is just what the key is named after. So if you're in C major, the 1 chord is C major. If you're in D major, the 1 chord is D major. In A minor, the 1 chord is A minor. So whatever the name of the key is, that would be your 1 chord. Then you just go up by scale degrees. So in C major, we have 1, D minor would be 2, E minor would be 3, F major, G major, and then finally our 6 is A. So in the context of D major, our 6 would be B minor, because we're just counting up scale degrees to 6, starting with 1 being what our key is named after. So in the context of C major, our A minor chord would be our minor 6 chord, which has the same job as a B minor chord would have in the context of a song in D major. So if you've been watching this series on how to spice up different chords in the context of keys, you're probably expecting me to start with inversions, but we're actually not going to be talking about inversions here. Instead, we're going to talk about a borrowed chord first. A great way to spice up your minor 6 chord, this might be cheating, but is actually to utilize a flat major 6 chord. So we'll use C major to keep it simple. We already established that our A minor chord is our minor 6. All you do to have a major flat 6 is to simply flatten your 1st and your 5th of your chord, but keep your 3rd intact. And that creates your flat 6, which is going to be a major chord. So a great way to utilize this is as a surprise, because people are expecting the 6th chord in a major key to sound minor. So if instead you throw in a major chord there, they're going to be surprised. So you'd have something like this. Maybe take your 1, 5, 6, 4, 1, 5, and instead it's 6, 4. All of a sudden it has a whole new light on it. Now that's probably not the ideal way to actually utilize it. Very commonly, a way to utilize this is to achieve some version of chromaticism. So you might actually start with your regular old minor 6 chord and then go to that flat 6, and then you might resolve down to a 5 chord, which then probably wants to resolve to that 1. The reason that it's often used in ways like this is it gets you what's called chromaticism. Chromaticism is really just a series of notes that are a half step away from each other, which is special because in any major or minor key, there are only 2 places where there are naturally occurring half steps, and they're not next to each other. We have between the 3 and the 4, between the 7 and the 8. That's it. So you never get that never happens naturally in a major or minor key. So a great way to achieve that is by going from our minor 6 to a major flat 6, then resolving down to, we could use a 1, or we could utilize a 5, or of course you could utilize a minor 3, I guess, to get that chromaticism, because we want to eventually get to that G. So just as an example, we have our minor 6 in this context, an A minor, and then we go to our flat 6. So we've gone from A flat, and then to our G. So we get that effect, right? Gives us chromaticism. Or we could instead end on our 1 chord, our C major chord, which still gets us that chromaticism. And then technically we could also get that chromaticism from this, which then would be ending on our minor 3 chord. But regardless, mixing it up and actually utilizing a flat 6, that would be then a major chord instead of what is normally occurring, which is a minor 6 chord, is a great way to spice up your 6 chord. Another great way to spice up your 6 chord is to actually make it a 5 chord, but not the Roman numeral 5 chord. Instead, I mean something like, for example, you might see C5 or A5. All that means is it is a dyad. Another way to look at it, especially if you're a guitarist, it's a power chord. Your 2-note power chord is going to be your root, and the 5th of a chord, it leaves out the 3rd. So that's a dyad or a 5 chord. Usually your 3-note power chords is just root, 5th, and then root again, an octave above. So if you do 3-note power chords, usually it's basically this, but lower, right? So that's a power chord, aka a 5 chord. Again, a regular 5, not Roman numeral 5. The beauty of dyads is that they are vague. So this, you can't tell if that's major or minor. So it kind of has that, it's not necessarily eerie sounding, but it's vague, right? This, oh, it's so happy. Yay, everybody's smiling, because that's major. And this is, oh no, something bad might be about to happen because it's minor. But this is, you don't know. So the beauty of utilizing this is you can sort of hold off on really establishing, oh, is this major or minor? And it allows you to exist in this vague middle ground, which can be a beautiful thing. So simply just using a dyad in place of the triad, where you just have the 1st and the 5th, can have a great effect of making your A minor chord technically not even an A minor chord. It's implying an A minor chord in the context of the key, but really nobody knows. Now, there's an opportunity to fill in with maybe your vocal melody, where your vocal melody establishes it's minor because it utilizes a C in that melody or another instrument. But either way, this allows you to operate in an area that's a little more vague. I think one of the things that people don't understand enough about music is people get too hung up on like major, happy, minor, sad. And it sort of turns into this false dichotomy where, first of all, you can utilize major in a way that it actually doesn't really sound that happy. I call it melancholy major. It literally is just when I write a song in a major key, but I use some vagueness and certain arrangements of it that make it still sound sad, but it's not quite as overly sad sounding that sometimes you get from minor. Not to mention there are modes that give us shades even brighter than major, even darker than minor, and then shades in between. So I think overall we tend to be overly simplistic and lose sometimes the value of, even if your vocal is utilizing that C, so it's very clear this is overall a minor chord, a minor 6 chord, operating with more vagueness relative to everything agreeing like, yes, this is a minor 6 chord, can go a long way to just make it a little more maybe eerie, maybe a little vague, and make people feel a little unsettled without being just overtly, this is sad and tragic. So play with that, utilize dyads really for all sorts of chords. Finally, another way to spice up our minor 6 chords are 7th chords. So 7th chords in general are very powerful, but I think that's another thing where people misunderstand and people are like, oh yeah, if you want to like make it jazzy, make it a 7th chord. Like, yeah, okay, there's truth to that, but there's more to 7th chords than that. And I think a way that I've never heard somebody talk about minor chords this way, but I think it's really missing out on some of the elements it gives you, because really, when you have a 7th chord, you're essentially taking 2 different triads and putting them together. So just to take this example, for our 6th chord, our minor 6th chord made into a 7th chord, it literally is the 3 notes of A minor, which would be our minor 6 in this context, and all 3 notes from our C major, which is our major 1 chord. When we put it together, even though, yes, the sound is overall dominated by this minor 3rd that makes it an A minor chord, it does sort of brighten it up. If we take just this, so that's our just A minor chord, what if we make it a 7th? It kind of brightens it up actually. Whereas often for like a C major, this versus that sort of got more uncertain, right? And really you hear that leading tone that wants to resolve. But for our minor chord, it actually, again, talking about sort of shades here, going from regular A minor This actually has sort of an effect of brightening it up a little bit because we have that full C major. Now again, it's going to depend on context, and maybe you don't hear that necessarily as bright, or there's different ways to hear it. And again, it's going to matter mostly contextually. But utilizing a seventh chord is a great way to mix things up and have some sort of surprising notes in there, at least relative to a lot of, say, singer-songwriter or pop music, because while it is utilized a lot in genres like jazz, it kind of is underutilized in a lot of other genres. So throwing in that 6th chord, but making a 7th chord can be a great way to really spice up that 6th chord, because now it's effectively both your minor 6th chord and your major 1 chord playing at the same time, just with a bit more of an emphasis on that minor 6. So hopefully this was helpful to you. If it was, something else you'll likely find helpful is my free guide on the 4 pillars of music theory that I think every single songwriter really needs to know. What we talked about here was going a little bit deeper, specifically on a 6th chord, but those 4 pillars that I talk about are intervals, which is really at the basis of everything else. That's how we get to things like when I talked about chromaticism and we're talking about half steps and things like that, or how I know that in every major or minor key, there's only 2 different half steps, and there's never 2 in a row, 2 half steps in a row, 3 notes in a row that have half steps in between them. That comes from understanding intervals. And then there's keys, which is really important because it effectively gives you all the notes you have that are naturally occurring in that key. So in C major, understanding that you have all the white keys, which is just no sharps or flats. Or in D major, you have F sharp and C sharp. Or in F major, you have B flat. Keys give you that understanding. And then from there, going to chords, understanding contextually in keys chords, which is really just understanding the Roman numeral notation that we were talking about here. When we said, hey, a minor 6th chord, in the context of C major, that's talking about an A minor chord. In the context of D major, that's talking about a B minor chord. So I think it's much more important to understand chords in that context, because really just saying like, oh, C major chords sound happy. Like, well, sort of, but it really depends on the context. And if we want to be more precise about the job of a C major chord, it really depends. In a song in G major, that C major chord has the job of a 4 chord, which makes it really sound a lot like what an F major chord would sound like in the context of C major. Even though the key is C major, so we have a C major chord, but really a C major chord in C major sounds the same as what a G major chord would sound like in the context of G major. And then lastly, chord progressions, which is really putting together the whole, hey, we have keys, we have chords. Now, what are some common progressions? How do we think through chord progressions? So that guide teaches those 4 things. If you're interested, be sure to check it out. Totally free. Songwritertheory.com/music theory guide. Link in the description down below. Thank you so much for watching. Hope this was helpful to you, and I'll talk to you in the next one.